I am not making this video to get famous. I am making this video because the police closed the case yesterday. They ruled the deaths of Ben and Katie as a tragic animal attack. Sheriff Brody looked me in the eye and said it was a bear. But bears don't cut the fuel lines on a Jeep. Bears don't throw voices to lure you into the dark. And bears definitely don't stand on two legs and laugh while they tear your best friends apart. I know what I saw. My friend Laura knows what she saw, and if the sheriff won't listen to us, maybe the internet will. My name is Donald. 6 months ago, me and 3 friends drove up to the Shadow Creek cabins in Michigan to celebrate our college graduation. We were supposed to drink beer, roast marshmallows, and talk about our futures. Only 2 of us came back. For the last 6 months, they have tried to tell us we were drunk. They tried to tell us we were hallucinating from trauma. They even tried to charge me with manslaughter because my fingerprints were on the knife. But I managed to record the interrogation on my phone when the lawyer wasn't looking. I am going to play you the tapes. I am going to tell you the story. But I need you to do one thing for me. They are going to try to take this video down. Sheriff Brody doesn't want people knowing what lives in those Michigan woods. Hit subscribe and share this video right now. Be my witness. If this channel disappears, at least you'll know the truth. It was supposed to be the best weekend of our lives. We had just graduated. No more exams, no more professors, just freedom. Ben had found this cabin online. It was cheap, secluded, and deep in the mountains, way past where the paved road ends. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Laura asked from the backseat. She was looking at her phone. "I have 0 bars, Don. The GPS cut out 10 minutes ago." "Relax," Ben said. He was driving, tapping his hand on the steering wheel to the music. "The owner said it's off the grid. That's the point. No phones, no emails, just us and nature." Katie was sitting next to me in the back. She rolled down the window. "It smells amazing out here. Pine trees and wait, what is that?" She wrinkled her nose. "What?" I asked. "It smells like copper," Katie said, "like old pennies." I didn't think anything of it at the time. I didn't know that the smell of copper is actually the smell of dried blood. We arrived at the cabin around 4:00 p.m. It was a beautiful place, an A-frame log cabin sitting right on the edge of a thick, dark forest. There was a fire pit, a big porch, and total silence. We unpacked the Jeep. We were laughing, carrying coolers of beer and bags of chips. We felt like we owned the world. We were young and invincible. But things got weird almost immediately. While Ben was unlocking the front door, I walked around to the back of the cabin to check out the view. The Michigan woods back there were dense. The trees grew so close together that it looked like a solid wall of black trunks. Standing right at the edge of the tree line, there was a wooden post. It looked like an old fence post, rotting in the ground. Stuck to the post with a rusty nail was a piece of leather. I walked closer. It wasn't leather. It was a dog collar, a thick, heavy-duty collar with spikes on it. It had been ripped in half, not cut, ripped. The metal buckle was twisted like a pretzel. "Donald, grab the cooler," Ben yelled from the porch. "Coming," I yelled back. I reached out and touched the collar. It was damp. I should have grabbed Ben right then. I should have shown him the collar and told him we needed to leave. A force strong enough to snap a spiked collar and twist steel isn't something you want to camp next to. But I didn't. I didn't want to be the guy who ruined the trip. I didn't want to be the coward. So I left it there. I walked back to the Jeep, grabbed a case of soda, and went inside. We spent the rest of the afternoon setting up. We made burgers, we played cards, we got drunk. By 9:00 p.m. the sun went down, and that's when the mood changed. We were sitting around the fire pit, toasting marshmallows. The fire was roaring, casting long, dancing shadows against the cabin wall. "So," Ben said, holding up his beer, "to the future." "To the future," we all said, clinking bottles. "Snap." A loud crack came from the darkness, just beyond the light of the fire. We all froze. "Probably a deer," Katie whispered. She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself. "Or a raccoon." "I'll check," Ben said. He was feeling brave from the beer. He stood up and grabbed the heavy flashlight he kept in the Jeep. He shined the beam into the Michigan woods. The light cut through the blackness, illuminating the trunks of the pines. "See," Ben laughed. "Nothing, just trees." He started to lower the flashlight. "Wait," Laura said. Her voice was trembling. "Go back to the left by that big oak tree." Ben moved the light back. At first I didn't see it. It just looked like two knots in the wood of the tree. But then the knots blinked. About 7 feet off the ground, two eyes were reflecting the light. They weren't green like a deer. They were yellow, bright, burning yellow. And they were wide set, too wide for a wolf, too wide for a cougar. "Is that a bear standing up?" Ben asked. His voice wasn't confident anymore. "Bears don't stare," I whispered. The eyes didn't move. They just floated there in the dark, watching us, judging us. Then slowly, the creature stepped out from behind the tree. It didn't step out on 4 legs. It stepped out on 2. We didn't scream. We couldn't. The air left our lungs. It was huge, covered in gray fur, with shoulders like a linebacker and a snout that looked like a wolf's nightmare. It stood there for a second, bathed in the flashlight beam. Then it threw its head back and opened its mouth. It didn't howl. It spoke. It wasn't English. It was a series of clicks and guttural growls that sounded like rocks grinding together. But the tone was clear. It was laughing at us. "Run," I choked out. "Get inside now." We slammed the heavy oak door shut and Ben threw the deadbolt. The sound of the metal latch sliding into place was the loudest thing I had ever heard. For a few seconds, nobody breathed. We just stood there in the entryway, chests heaving, waiting for the impact. We expected the door to splinter. We expected a shoulder to ram against the wood. But nothing happened. The forest outside was dead silent. "What was that?" Laura sobbed, sliding down the wall until she hit the floor. She wrapped her arms around her knees, rocking back and forth. "Ben, what was that?" Ben was packing the small living room. He ran his hands through his hair over and over. "It was a prank," he said. His voice was too loud, too desperate. "It was some local redneck in a suit trying to scare the tourists. That's all it was, just a sick joke." "A guy in a suit doesn't have eyes that glow like that," Katie whispered. She was staring at the window, terrified that the curtains weren't thick enough. "And a guy in a suit doesn't stand 7 feet tall." "Stop it," Ben yelled. He grabbed a fire poker from next to the hearth. "It was a bear or a prank. We just need to calm down. We're safe in here. This is solid log construction. Nothing is getting in." I looked at the door. It was solid oak, yes. But I kept thinking about the dog collar I had found earlier. The steel buckle hadn't been cut. It had been twisted. Whatever was out there had hands that could bend metal like it was wet clay. A wooden door wasn't a barricade. It was just a delay. "We need to call the police," I said, pulling my phone out. "No service," Laura moaned. "I checked, it's dead." "The landline," Ben said, pointing to the kitchen. "There's a phone on the wall." I ran to the kitchen. I grabbed the receiver and put it to my ear. I listened for the dial tone. Silence. "Is it working?" Katie asked from the doorway. I pulled the phone away from the wall. The cord dangled uselessly. The end wasn't unplugged. It was chewed. The plastic casing was mangled and the copper wires were frayed and wet. "They cut the line," I said, my blood turning to ice. "It's not a bear, Ben. Bears don't cut phone lines." That was when the sound started. It wasn't a banging on the door. It came from above us. Dust drifted down from the ceiling rafters. It was walking on the roof. The footsteps were heavy, slow, and deliberate. It sounded like a man walking, but heavier, like he was wearing boots made of lead. It walked from the peak of the roof down toward the chimney. "It's trying to find a way in," I whispered. Sheriff Brody told me later that it was just pine cones falling, I said to the camera, my voice shaking with anger. He said the wind was knocking branches onto the roof, but pine cones don't pace back and forth. Pine cones don't stop directly above your head and sniff. We huddled together in the middle of the living room. As far away from the fireplace as possible, we stared at the chimney opening. A bit of soot fell into the cold fire pit. Then the scratching began. Long, slow scrapes against the shingles. It was testing the roof. Suddenly, the cabin went pitch black. The refrigerator hum died. The porch light outside flickered and vanished. The creature had pulled the main breaker. Laura screamed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the dark. "Stay quiet," Ben hissed. "Everyone get down." We crouched on the floor in the dark. My eyes adjusted slowly. The moonlight coming through the gaps in the curtains cast long, jagged shadows across the floor. "We have to make a run for it," Ben whispered. "The Jeep is right out front. I have the keys in my pocket. If we all run at once, we can make it." "No," I said. "That's what it wants. It cut the power to flush us out." "We can't stay here, Donald," Ben snapped. "It's on the roof. It's going to come down the chimney or tear the shingles off. The Jeep is our only chance." He stood up. He was going to do it. He was going to open the door. "Ben, don't," Katie begged, grabbing his leg. "I'm getting us out of here," Ben said. He shook her off. He moved to the window next to the door. "I'm going to check if the coast is clear." He pulled the curtain back just an inch. He peeked out toward the driveway where we had parked the Jeep. I watched Ben's silhouette in the moonlight. I saw his body go rigid. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, frozen, holding the curtain. "Ben," I whispered. "The Jeep," he said. His voice sounded hollow, like his soul had just left his body. "What about it?" "The hood is open," Ben whispered. "And the doors are gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean ripped off," Ben said. He turned to look at us, and even in the dark I could see the terror on his face. "The doors are lying in the grass. The seats are shredded. It destroyed the car, Donald. It didn't just disable it, it tore it apart." He let the curtain fall back. We were trapped. No phone, no power, no car. And a creature that was strong enough to rip a car door off its hinges was walking on the roof above our heads. Then a sound came from the front porch. Creak. The footsteps on the roof had stopped. It had jumped down. It was standing right on the other side of the door. We held our breath. I gripped the handle of a steak knife I had grabbed from the kitchen counter. It felt like a toy. Knock, knock, knock. 3 polite raps on the door. Then a voice spoke. "Guys." It was Ben's voice. I looked at Ben. He was crouching right next to me, his mouth clamped shut, his eyes wide with horror. The voice from outside spoke again. It sounded exactly like Ben, but the cadence was wrong. It was choppy, like a recording being skipped. "Guys, open the door, it's safe." "Stop it," Laura whimpered, covering her ears. "Make it stop." "I found the keys," the voice mimicked. "Come out." It was trying to confuse us. It wanted us to doubt our own senses. It wanted us to open the door for our friend, even though our friend was sitting right there. "We know you're out there," I yelled. I couldn't help it. The anger boiled over the fear. "We have a gun." I lied. We didn't have a gun. We were college kids. We had beer and marshmallows. The voice on the porch stopped. There was a long silence. Then a low, deep sound vibrated through the wood of the door. It was a chuckle. "No gun," the creature growled. This time it didn't use Ben's voice. It used its own, a wet, gravelly rasp that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a grave. "Only meat." Then the window to the left of the door shattered. A gray arm, long and covered in muscle, shot through the broken glass. It fumbled blindly for the deadbolt. "It's getting in," Katie screamed. Ben lunged forward with the fire poker. He swung it with everything he had. smashing the iron rod down onto the gray arm. The creature roared, a sound so loud it rattled my teeth. It yanked its arm back, shredding its skin on the jagged glass. We heard heavy footsteps pounding off the porch and running into the Michigan woods. "Did you get it?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. Ben stood there, chest heaving, holding the bent poker. "I think so. I think I heard it." I looked at the blood on the floor. It was dark, almost black in the moonlight, and it was sizzling. "You didn't scare it off, Ben," I said, staring at the broken window. The cold night air was pouring in, bringing the smell of copper with it. "You just made it mad." We had survived the first breach, but now the cabin was open, and out in the dark the rest of the pack was waking up. Sheriff Brody's report says that the damage to the cabin interior was caused by a drug-induced delirium. He claimed we flipped the furniture ourselves. He claimed we smashed the window in a fit of rage. He looked at the claw marks on the oak floorboards and called them hatchet marks. I wish I could scream at him. I wish I could drag him back to that living room and make him smell the air. It didn't smell like drugs. It smelled like wet dog and copper. It smelled like death. After Ben smashed the creature's arm, we didn't celebrate. We didn't have time. The cold mountain wind was whistling through the jagged hole in the glass, and with it came the sounds of the forest waking up. But it wasn't the sound of crickets or owls. It was the sound of movement. Heavy, wet movement on all sides of the cabin. "Help me," Ben yelled. He was shoving the heavy leather sofa toward the broken window. "Donald, get on the other side. Push." I holstered the steak knife in my belt and threw my shoulder against the couch. We slid it across the floor, grinding it over the shattered glass until it slammed against the wall, covering the hole. It wasn't a perfect seal, but it was better than nothing. "Get the table," Ben ordered. He was sweating, his eyes wild. "We need to fortify the door. If that thing comes back, the deadbolt won't hold." We dragged the dining table over and flipped it on its side. We piled chairs on top of it. We built a fortress in the middle of the room, creating a small, sad little castle out of furniture. Laura and Katie were huddled in the corner, clutching each other. Laura was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. "It's bleeding," Katie whispered, pointing at the floor near the window. I looked down. Where the creature's arm had been, there was a pool of dark liquid. It wasn't red. It was almost black like motor oil, and it was steaming. It hissed faintly as it soaked into the rug, leaving a chemical burn mark. "That's not normal blood," I said quietly. "We need a weapon," Ben said. He was packing again, gripping the bent fire poker. "The knife isn't enough. The poker is bent. We need something sharp." He ran to the kitchen and came back with the biggest carving knife he could find. He handed it to me. "If they come in, you aim for the eyes. That's the only soft spot. You saw the fur. It's like armor." For the next hour we sat in the dark, listening. That is the worst part of a siege. It's not the fighting, it's the waiting. Your brain starts to play tricks on you. Every creak of the house settling sounds like a footstep. Every gust of wind sounds like breathing. But then we heard a sound that was unmistakable. "Too-wit." It was a whistle, a sharp two-tone bird call. "It's a bird," Laura whispered, hopeful. "Maybe morning is coming." "Birds don't whistle at midnight," I said. "Too-wit." A second whistle answered from the other side of the cabin, then a third from the back, then a fourth from the roof. My stomach dropped. "They're communicating." Ben asked. "You think there's more than one?" "Ben, look at the window," I pointed. Even blocked by the sofa, we could see through the gaps in the cushions. Outside in the moonlight, shadows were moving. Not one shadow, dozens. They were darting between the trees, moving with a speed that blurred the eyes. They were circling us. They weren't attacking yet. They were assessing. They knew the window was blocked. They knew the door was barricaded, so they were looking for a new way in. Then the psychological warfare started again. From out in the dark, a sound cut through the air. It was a siren, a police siren. Laura jumped up. The police, someone called them, they saw the fire. She started to run toward the door. Stop, I tackled her. We hit the floor hard. Laura, listen to it. Let me go, it's the cops. Listen, I screamed. We froze, the siren continued. It was perfect, too perfect. It didn't change pitch. It didn't get closer or further away. It was a loop. And underneath the electronic wail, if you listened closely, you could hear a wet, gurgling intake of breath between each cycle. It wasn't a car, it was a throat. It's mimicking a siren, I whispered, holding Laura down. If we open that door, we die. Laura started to sob into the carpet. The hope had broken her. That's what they do. They give you hope just so they can take it away. The siren stopped abruptly, cutting off mid-wail. Silence returned. They know we didn't fall for it, Ben said. He gripped the poker tighter. What do they do now? We got our answer a second later. Scritch. It didn't come from the window. It didn't come from the door. It came from under us. The cabin was built on a raised foundation. There was a crawl space underneath the floorboards to keep the wood off the damp earth. We had forgotten about the crawl space. Long, hard claws were dragging along the underside of the floorboards. They were right beneath our feet. We scrambled onto the furniture. Ben jumped onto the overturned table. I pulled the girls up onto the sofa. We stared at the floor like it was lava. The scratching moved. It went from the center of the room over to the corner where the old pot-bellied stove sat. We could hear it sniffing the wood. It was smelling us through the cracks in the floor. The floorboards aren't thick, Ben whispered, his face pale. They're just pine. Suddenly, a massive impact shook the house. Boom! Something had slammed its back against the floor joists from underneath. The whole cabin jumped. Dust rained down. A picture frame fell off the wall and shattered. Boom! They were ramming the floor. They were trying to punch through. They're coming up, Katie screamed. They're going to come up through the floor. The bedroom, Ben yelled. The bedroom has a concrete slab. It's an addition. Go. It was our only chance. The back bedroom had been added later. It wasn't over the crawl space. It was on solid ground. We scrambled off the furniture. I grabbed Laura's hand. Ben grabbed Katie. We sprinted down the narrow hallway as the floor behind us began to splinter. I looked back just as we reached the bedroom door. In the center of the living room, the floorboards exploded upward. Wood shards flew everywhere. A massive gray hand burst through the hole, grasping blindly at the air where we had been standing seconds ago. We slammed the bedroom door and locked it. We pushed the heavy dresser against it. We were safe from the floor, but we had just trapped ourselves in a 10-by-10 box with no exit, and outside the pack began to howl. This time it wasn't a mimic, it was a victory song. The police report for Katie's death is 3 pages long. It lists the cause of death as blunt force trauma and exsanguination due to animal predation. It says she wandered outside in a state of panic. It says she got separated from the group. That is a lie. Katie didn't wander anywhere. She was holding my hand. She was standing right next to me in that bedroom. They didn't find her body in the Michigan woods. They found pieces of her. And the thing that took her didn't do it because it was hungry. It did it to punish us for hiding. We were trapped in the back bedroom, a 10-by-10 box with walls painted a cheerful shade of yellow. We had pushed the heavy oak dresser against the door and wedged a chair under the handle. But the sounds coming from the other side of the wall made those defenses feel like cardboard. It sounded like a demolition crew was working in the living room. We heard the crunch of wood as the dining table was smashed to splinters. We heard the ripping sound of the sofa being torn apart. They were destroying our scent. They were erasing the fort we had built. They know we're in here, Laura whispered. She was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. She wasn't crying anymore. She had gone past crying into a state of shock where her eyes were just 2 black holes staring at nothing. We need to block the window, Ben said. He was frantic. He grabbed the mattress off the bed and shoved it against the glass. "Donald, help me with the bed frame. We can wedge it against the wall." We worked in the dark, fumbling with the heavy wooden frame. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. We jammed the headboard against the mattress, pinning it over the window. It wasn't perfect, but it blocked the view. If they wanted in, they would have to punch through a mattress and a layer of solid wood. Then the noise in the living room stopped. The silence was worse than the crashing. It meant they were done with the furniture. It meant they were focusing on the bedroom. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, polite knocks on the bedroom door, right behind the dresser. We all froze. Ben held the fire poker like a baseball bat. I gripped the carving knife until my knuckles turned white. "Open up," a voice said. It wasn't Ben's voice this time. It wasn't the sheriff. It was a woman's voice. It was soft, sweet, and terrified. "Please," the voice whimpered. "Let me in, it's cold out here." Katie gasped. She squeezed my hand so hard her fingernails dug into my skin. That sounds like my mom." "It's not your mom," I hissed. "Katie, don't listen to it." "Katie," the voice called out through the door. "Honey, are you in there? The police are here. We're waiting for you." Katie took a step toward the door. Her eyes were glazed over. The mimicry was perfect. It had the exact cadence, the exact pitch. It was pulling the memories right out of her head. "Don't you touch that door," Ben shouted at her. He grabbed her shoulder and yanked her back. "Think, Katie, your mom is 3 hours away in the city. That thing is standing in our living room." "But she sounds hurt," Katie sobbed. "It's a trick," Ben screamed. Smash! The sound didn't come from the door. It came from the window. The glass shattered inward. The mattress we had shoved against the frame bulged forward. Something massive had slammed into it from the outside. "Back up," I yelled. Smash! Another hit. The wooden headboard we had wedged in place cracked down the middle. The mattress was being pushed into the room. We scrambled back against the far wall. We were trapped between the door where the mimic was waiting and the window where the muscle was breaking in. "The closet," Laura screamed. "Get in the closet." It was a tiny closet with a folding shutter door. It was pathetic, but it was the only other layer of protection we had. Laura dove in. I pulled Katie with me. But Ben didn't move. He stood in the middle of the room holding the poker. He was losing his mind. He was going to fight it. "Come on," Ben screamed at the window. "Come and get it." The mattress flew across the room. It didn't just fall, it was thrown. It hit the opposite wall with enough force to crack the plaster. The window was open. The cold night air rushed in, smelling of copper and wet fur. And then it entered. It squeezed through the window frame with a fluid, unnatural motion. It was the alpha, the gray one. In the small bedroom, it looked impossibly big. Its head brushed the ceiling. Its fur was matted with blood, some of it black, some of it red. It stood up and looked at Ben. It didn't attack him, it ignored him. It looked right at the closet. It knew exactly where the weak ones were. "No," Ben swung the poker. He hit the creature in the ribs. It sounded like hitting a bag of wet cement. The creature didn't even flinch. It backhanded Ben. It was a casual motion like swatting a fly. Ben flew across the room and hit the wall. He slumped to the floor, unconscious. I tried to close the closet door. I tried to lock the latch. But the gray hand reached in. It didn't grab me. It didn't grab Laura. It grabbed Katie. It grabbed her by the ankle. "Donald," she screamed. She clawed at my shirt. She clawed at the carpet. I grabbed her arms. I pulled with everything I had. "Let go of her," I screamed. I looked into the creature's eyes. They were yellow, ancient, and bored. It wasn't struggling. It was just stronger. It pulled her like she weighed nothing. "Help me," Katie shrieked. Her fingers slipped from my grasp. I lunged forward, grabbing her waist, but the creature gave one sharp yank. Katie was pulled out of the closet. She was pulled across the floor. She grabbed the door frame, her fingernails leaving gouges in the wood. "Mom," she screamed. "Mommy." The creature picked her up by one leg, dangling her upside down. It looked at me one last time. It grinned, exposing rows of yellow, serrated teeth. Then it turned and jumped out the window, taking her with it. "Katie," I screamed. I ran to the window. I looked out into the darkness. I saw the gray shape running toward the tree line, carrying her like a doll. I heard her screaming. I heard her calling my name. And then from the darkness of the Michigan woods, the other voices joined in. They weren't mimicking her mom anymore. They were laughing, a chorus of deep, chattering laughter that drowned out her screams. I sank to the floor. Ben was out cold. Laura was curled in the closet, making a sound like a wounded animal, and Katie was gone. I looked at the empty window. I realized then that the police were never going to believe this. They would see the broken glass. They would see the blood, and they would look at me. We didn't mourn Katie. We didn't have time to cry. In the red zone, grief is a luxury you can't afford. If you stop to cry, you die. The room was silent except for the wind whistling through the shattered window. The mattress lay in the corner, bent and useless. Ben was still slumped against the wall, a trickle of blood running from his ear. Laura was in the closet, making a low, keening sound like a wounded animal. I grabbed Ben by the collar and shook him hard. "Wake up," I hissed. "Ben, get up." He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. His pupils were different sizes. "Concussion, bad one." "Katie," he mumbled, his speech slurred. "Where's Katie?" "She's gone," I said, my voice cracking. "We have to move now." I looked at the window. The sill was smeared with blood where they had dragged her out. But the terror wasn't what had left. It was what was coming back. From the darkness outside, I heard the sound of heavy breathing. Wet, rattling breaths. The alpha had left to dispose of Katie, but he had left the window open for the rest of the pack. A claw hooked over the windowsill, gray fur, black nails. "Laura," I screamed. I ran to the closet and yanked her out. She was dead weight. Her legs were jelly. "Run, we have to get to the river." "The door," Ben stammered, trying to stand up. He stumbled and fell against the dresser we had used as a barricade. We blocked the door. We had to undo our own fortress. The creature at the window was pulling itself up. I could see the top of its head, ears flattened back, eyes focused on us. It wasn't the alpha. It was smaller, faster, a wiry thing with mange patches on its shoulders. It hissed at us, a sound like a high-pressure gas leak. I threw my shoulder against the heavy oak dresser. Ben pushed with his good arm. We slid it 3 inches, just enough to squeeze through. "Go," I shoved Laura into the hallway. Ben followed, stumbling. I squeezed through last just as the creature vaulted through the window behind me. Its claws clicked on the hardwood floor. It didn't roar. It just scrambled forward, eager. We ran down the hallway. The cabin, which had felt like a sanctuary hours ago, now felt like a tomb. The air inside was freezing. The front door was still barricaded with the table and chairs, but the living room was destroyed. The sofa was shredded. The rug was soaked in that black, oily blood. "The back door," I yelled, "through the kitchen." We burst into the kitchen. It was pitch black. I fumbled for the deadbolt on the back door. My fingers were slippery with sweat and fear. "Guys." We froze. The voice came from the pantry. The door was slightly ajar. "Guys, help me." It was Katie. Laura stopped dead. She turned toward the pantry. "Katie," she whispered, "you escaped." "Don't listen to it," I screamed. I grabbed Laura's arm. "That is not Katie." "But she's hurt," Laura sobbed. She took a step toward the pantry. "She's in there." The pantry door creaked open slowly. It wasn't Katie standing there. It was a wolf, but it was standing upright, wedged into the small space among the shelves of canned food. Its head was pressed against the ceiling. It was mimicking her voice perfectly, using her screams to lure us closer. "Help me!" The wolf growled, its lips not moving, the sound vibrating from its throat. Laura screamed, the spell broke. I threw the back door open. We spilled out onto the rear deck. The cold mountain air hit us like a physical blow. "Jump," Ben yelled. We didn't use the stairs. We vaulted over the railing, dropping 5 feet onto the frozen grass below. I landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Ben landed clumsily, crying out as his ankle twisted. Laura just fell in a heap. "Get up," I hauled Laura to her feet. "To the water. They can't track us in the water." We ran. We ran blindly into the tree line behind the cabin. The moon was hidden behind clouds, leaving us in total darkness. We were running purely on instinct, crashing through fern bushes, tripping over roots. Behind us, the cabin erupted in noise, the sound of glass shattering, the sound of doors being kicked off hinges. They were swarming the house. They realized the prey had flushed. "My leg," Ben gasped. He was limping bad. "Donald, I can't." "You can." I grabbed his arm, draping it over my shoulder. "We are not dying here." We could hear the river ahead, the rushing sound of white water. It was our only hope. If we could get into the current, the cold water would mask our scent, and the noise would hide our footsteps. But we weren't fast enough. To our left, a shape blurred past us. It moved on 4 legs, low to the ground, silent as a shadow. It was flanking us. To our right, another shape moved. They were hurting us again. "They're cutting us off," Ben yelled. "Just run straight," I screamed. "Don't look at them." We burst out of the trees onto the rocky riverbank. The water was black and churning, swollen from the recent rains. It looked deadly, but the Michigan woods behind us were death guaranteed. "Jump," I commanded. We didn't hesitate. We plunged into the freezing water. The shock was instant. It knocked the wind out of me. The current grabbed us, slamming us against rocks, dragging us downstream. I swallowed a mouthful of icy, muddy water. I flailed, trying to keep my head up. "Laura," I choked out. I saw her head bobbing 10 feet away. Ben was further down, clinging to a log. We let the river take us. We drifted for what felt like miles, shivering so violently my teeth felt like they would crack. We were numb. We were hypothermic, but we were alive. Or so we thought. As we rounded a bend in the river, the moon came out from behind the clouds. It illuminated a sandbar stretching out into the water. Standing on the sandbar, waiting for us, was the Alpha. He wasn't wet. He hadn't swum. He had simply run along the bank, outpacing the current. He knew where the river went. He knew where the rapids slowed down. He stood there, arms crossed over his massive chest, watching us float toward him like ducks in a shooting gallery. He didn't attack, he just pointed. He pointed a long, gray finger toward the Michigan woods on the opposite bank. He was giving us a choice again: get out of the water on my side or drown. I looked at Ben. I looked at Laura. We were too weak to fight the current anymore. We washed up on the sandbar, coughing, freezing, and broken, right at the feet of the monster that had eaten our friend. The river water was freezing, but the sandbar was worse. It was a strip of jagged rocks and coarse silt in the middle of the churning black water. I crawled onto it on my hands and knees, coughing up mud. My lungs burned like they were filled with broken glass. Next to me, Laura was curled in a ball, shivering so violently her teeth clacked together like dice. Ben was face down in the mud, groaning. I looked up. I didn't want to, but I had to. The Alpha was standing 5 feet away. Sheriff Brody told me later that bears often stand on their hind legs to get a better view. He said that in the dark, a wet bear can look like a monster. He showed me photos of bears. He showed me diagrams. But bears don't cross their arms. Bears don't tap their foot impatiently. The creature towered over us. Up close, he was even more terrifying than he had been in the cabin. He smelled of wet musk and rotting meat. His gray fur was slick with rain, clinging to muscles that looked like steel cables. But it was his face that broke me. He wasn't snarling. He wasn't drooling in hunger, he looked disappointed. He looked like a parent who had just caught his children breaking a rule. He took a step forward. The sand crunched under his massive, clawed feet. He crouched down, resting his elbows on his knees, bringing his face level with mine. His yellow eyes bored into me. They were ancient. There was an intelligence behind them that made my skin crawl. "Ben," I whispered, not daring to look away from the monster. "Ben, stay down." The creature tilted his head. He reached out a hand. I flinched, expecting him to rip my throat out. But he didn't strike. He extended one long black claw and gently tapped the center of my forehead. Tab, tab. It was a question. Then he spoke. It wasn't like before. He didn't mimic Ben or Katie. He used his own voice. It was a low, vibrating rumble that I felt in my chest more than I heard with my ears. It sounded like stones grinding together deep underground. "Why?" One word, simple, terrifying. I stared at him, my jaw trembling. What? The creature bared his teeth. It wasn't a smile, it was a threat. He leaned closer, his hot breath washing over my face. It smelled like copper. "Why's you come?" He struggled with the words. His vocal cords weren't made for human speech. He had to force the sounds out, shaping them with a mouth full of fangs. We rented the cabin," I stammered. I didn't know what else to say. I was bargaining with a nightmare. "We just wanted to camp, we didn't know." The alpha let out a sharp huff of air. He looked at Laura, then at Ben. He reached out and grabbed Ben's injured leg. Ben screamed as the creature squeezed his swollen ankle. "Stop," I yelled. I tried to lunge forward, but my body was too frozen to move. "Stop it. We didn't know this was your territory." The creature released Ben. He looked back at me. "Not mine," the creature growled. He pointed a finger straight up toward the sky. Then he pointed down toward the earth. "Old," he said, "before you." He was telling me that this wasn't about territory lines on a map. This place was ancient. It belonged to them long before we built roads or cabins. We were the invaders. We were the infestation. He reached into the fur around his neck. I realized he was wearing something. It was a necklace made of woven grass, similar to the one he had left on the trail. But hanging from this one wasn't a clump of hair. It was a set of keys. My heart stopped. They were the keys to the Jeep. He dangled them in front of my face. They jingled softly. "You leave," he said. He dropped the keys in the mud in front of me. I looked at the keys, then back at him. "You're letting us go." He laughed. It was that same dry, chuffing sound. He stood up to his full height. He looked down at us with pure contempt. "No," he rumbled, "not let go." He pointed at the river. Then he pointed at the road that ran parallel to the water, about 100 yards through the trees. "Send a message." He wasn't letting us go because of mercy. He was letting us go because he wanted messengers. He wanted us to go back to the world of paved roads and streetlights and tell everyone what we saw. He wanted us to spread the fear. He leaned down one last time. "Tell them," he whispered, "tell them we are awake." Then he kicked me. It wasn't a killing blow. It was a shove, like a boot to the ribs. I flew backward into the mud. He kicked Ben next, rolling him over. He grabbed Laura by the back of her shirt and threw her toward the trees. "Run," I gasped, scrambling to my feet. "Run to the road." We didn't look back. We scrambled off the sandbar and splashed through the shallow water to the bank. We clawed our way up the muddy slope, tearing our clothes on thorns and brambles. We dragged Ben between us. We burst onto the asphalt of the old logging road just as the sun began to crack over the horizon. The gray light of dawn hit us. We collapsed on the yellow line in the middle of the road. We were covered in mud, blood, and freezing water. 10 minutes later, a logging truck came around the bend. The driver slammed on his brakes, the air horn blasting. He jumped out, looking at us like we were ghosts. "My God," the driver said, running over. "What happened to you kids? Was it a bear?" I looked at the driver. I looked back at the tree line. The Michigan woods were silent. The Alpha wasn't chasing us. He had done his job. I clutched the Jeep keys that were still in my hand. I squeezed them until they cut my palm. "No," I whispered, my voice raspy. "It wasn't a bear." The driver helped us into his cab. He called the police. He called the ambulance. He told us we were safe. But as the truck pulled away, I looked in the side mirror. Standing at the edge of the Michigan woods, just inside the shadow of the trees, was a tall, gray figure. It raised one hand and waved. It was a slow, mocking wave. Sheriff Brody arrived at the hospital 2 hours later. He took one look at our injuries and told the doctors to write down "animal attack." He refused to listen to the recording on my phone. He refused to look at the bite marks on the Jeep keys. He knew, I saw it in his eyes. He knew exactly what was in those Michigan woods, and he was terrified. That was 6 months ago. I thought it was over. I thought that because we escaped, we were free. But last night I heard a sound outside my apartment window. I live in the city now on the 4th floor. There are no bears here. There are no wolves. But at 3:00 a.m. I heard it. Tab tab. On the glass. And then a whistle. To wit. They didn't just want us to send a message. They followed us home to make sure we delivered it. The file you are about to hear is the only reason I am still alive. It is my insurance policy. Sheriff Brody thought he deleted it from my phone while I was sedated in the hospital, but he forgot one thing. My phone backs up to the cloud automatically. I have cleaned up the audio as much as possible. I removed the sound of the wind and the rushing river water. What is left is the voice of the thing that killed Katie. Visual: a black screen with a waveform moving. The date stamp reads 6 months ago. Audio start. Sound of splashing water, heavy breathing. Donald: me, please, we just want to go home. Low, vibrating rumble. It sounds like a large engine idling. The entity: home is far. Sound of a wet thud. This was the Alpha stepping onto the sandbar. Donald: what do you want? The entity: want you to know. Donald: know what? The entity: the Michigan woods are not empty. Sound of metal jingling, the keys hitting the mud. The entity: run, little meat, run to the lights. Audio end. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the laptop. Do you hear that? Do you hear the spacing of the words? That isn't a bear. That isn't a wolf. Bears can mimic sounds maybe, but they can't form sentences. They can't understand the concept of home or lights. This is intelligence, and that is what Sheriff Brody is terrified of. Let me take you back to the hospital. I woke up in a sterile white room. The smell of antiseptic was burning my nose, but underneath it I could still smell the copper scent of the riverbank. My ribs were taped up. My arm was in a sling. Sitting in the chair next to my bed wasn't a doctor. It was Sheriff Brody. He was a big man with a thick mustache and tired eyes. He was holding my phone in a plastic evidence bag. "You're awake," he said. His voice was flat. "Where are Ben and Laura?" I croaked. "They're in the other wing, sedated. They're in shock, son." Brody leaned forward. "They're telling some pretty wild stories, talking about monsters, talking about voices." "It's not a story," I said, trying to sit up. "I have proof. Check my phone, the voice memo. I recorded it." Brody's eyes flickered. He looked at the phone in the bag. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "I listened to it, Donald," he said. "Then you know," I said, relief washing over me. "You know it wasn't a bear." Brody stood up. He walked to the window and closed the blinds. He turned back to me, and his face was hard as stone. "It was a bear, Donald. A rogue male black bear, probably sick, rabid. That messes with their vocal cords, makes them sound strange." Strange, I shouted. It spoke English, it gave me my car keys. Trauma does funny things to the brain, Brody said. He opened the evidence bag, he took my phone out. You hit your head hard, you're confusing reality with nightmares. It happens. He tapped the screen. I watched him go into my voice memos. I watched his thumb hover over the delete button. Don't, I yelled. I'm doing this for you, Brody said. If this gets out, if people hear this, it starts a panic, and panic gets people hurt. Delete. There, Brody said, dropping the phone back in the bag. Case closed. Animal attack. You kids were drinking, you got careless, and a bear got you. That's the story. That's the only story. He leaned over the bed, his face inches from mine. If you tell anyone about voices or monsters, I will have you committed to the state asylum so fast your head will spin. Do you understand me? You are a survivor. Don't become a tragedy. He walked out. He thought he had won. He thought he had buried the truth along with the pieces of Katie they found in the Michigan woods. But he was wrong. Because while Sheriff Brody was busy scrubbing the evidence, he didn't notice the other thing that had followed me to the hospital. That night, lying in the hospital bed, I couldn't sleep. The drugs were wearing off. The room was dark. I looked at the window. We were on the second floor. There was condensation on the glass, and written in the fog on the outside of the pane was a symbol. It was a crude circle with an X through it. I blinked and it was gone, faded away. I told myself it was the meds. I told myself Brody was right. It was just trauma. But then I got home. I moved to the city. I got this apartment on the 4th floor. I thought I was safe. But 3 days ago, my neighbor's dog went missing. It was a golden retriever. Big, loud dog. Yesterday, I found its collar. It was sitting on my doormat. The leather was ripped in half. The buckle was twisted, and it was wet. I picked it up. It smelled like the river. They aren't just in the Michigan woods, guys. Sheriff Brody knows it. The Alpha knows it. And now you know it. They followed the audio file. They followed the evidence. And now that you've listened to the recording, now that you've heard the Alpha's voice, I have to ask you a question. Are your doors locked? Because I just heard the whistle again. To wit, it's coming from the fire escape. I have to go. I have to barricade the door. I set my phone up on the kitchen counter and hit the Go Live button. My hands were shaking so hard I almost knocked it over. I watched the viewer count tick up. 5 people, then 20, then 100. The title of the stream was simple: They Are Here. Help me. I pulled the refrigerator away from the wall and shoved it in front of the front door. It scraped loudly against the linoleum. In the chat, people were typing fake and is this an ARG? And go to bed, weirdo. Listen to me, I said to the camera, my voice cracking. My name is Donald. I am in apartment 4B. If the feed cuts out, send the police. But tell them it's not a burglary. Tell them to bring the SWAT team. Clang. The sound came from the fire escape window behind me. It was a metallic ring, like a heavy boot hitting the iron grate. I spun around, pointing the kitchen knife at the window. The blinds were drawn, but I could see the shadow. It was huge. It blocked out the streetlights from the alleyway. Did you hear that? I yelled at the phone. Tell me you heard that. The chat froze for a second, then the comments exploded. Someone is on the balcony. Get out of there. Look at the shadow. I backed up until my back hit the fridge. I was trapped. The front door was blocked by my own barricade. The window was the only other way out, and the monster was standing right there. I expected it to smash the glass. I expected the roar. But that's the thing about the Alpha, he doesn't repeat himself. He had already done the smash and grab at the cabin. This was the city. He was adapting. The shadow moved. It crouched down. Then the window latch began to turn. I watched in horror. The little metal lock on the sash was rusting, painted over a dozen times by the landlord. But it was moving. A thin, black claw had slipped between the window frame and the glass, catching the latch and slowly, agonizingly, twisting it open. "They have fingers," I whispered to the stream. "They know how to unlock windows." The sash slid up. It didn't make a sound. The alpha had greased the tracks. No, he was just that strong. He lifted the heavy pane like it was made of paper. The curtains billowed inward. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't just the copper smell of blood anymore. It was mixed with the smell of wet garbage, exhaust fumes, and city grime. He had been tracking me through the sewers. He had been living in the alleyways. A gray hand reached through the curtains, but it wasn't gray anymore. It was smeared with soot and oil. He had camouflaged himself. He looked like a shadow come to life. "Get back!" I screamed, waving the knife. The hand stopped. It held something. It tossed an object onto the kitchen floor. It rolled to my feet. It was a cell phone. I looked down. It was pink. It had a glittery case. My stomach dropped. It was Laura's phone. Laura was still in the hospital. She was in the psychiatric ward, sedated, under 24-hour watch. There was no way she could have lost her phone, unless... The phone lit up. A text message appeared on the screen. "Open the door." I looked at the camera. "He went to the hospital," I choked out. "He took Laura." From the fire escape, a voice drifted into the room. It wasn't the gravelly voice of the alpha. It was Laura's voice. "Donald," she whimpered, "let me in, it's so high up, I'm scared of heights." It was perfect mimicry, but I knew. I knew Laura was locked in a padded room across town. This was a game. "You're not Laura," I yelled. Suddenly, a loud pounding came from the front door, the one blocked by the fridge. "Police," a man's voice boomed. "Open this door, we got a noise complaint." I laughed. It was a hysterical, broken sound. "You're late," I screamed at the door. "He's already inside." "Open the door or we will kick it down," the cop yelled. I looked at the window. The shadow was climbing through. I saw the massive shoulders, the soot-covered fur, the yellow eyes glowing in the dark kitchen. I looked at the door. The cops were there. I had to choose, the monster or the police who wouldn't believe me. I shoved the fridge aside. "Come in," I screamed. "Shoot it, shoot the window." The door flew open. 2 officers burst in, guns drawn. They saw me holding a knife. "Drop the knife," the first officer yelled, aiming his taser at my chest. "Not me," I pointed behind me. "Him." The officers looked. The alpha was standing in the middle of my kitchen. In the fluorescent light of the apartment, he looked impossible. He was too big for the room. His head brushed the popcorn ceiling. He was covered in city filth, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. The officers froze. Their brains couldn't process it. They saw a giant dog, a man in a suit. "Freeze," the second officer stammered. His voice was trembling. The alpha didn't freeze. He moved faster than a striking cobra. He grabbed the refrigerator, the one I had struggled to move inches, and threw it. He threw it across the room like it was a cardboard box. It slammed into the first officer, pinning him against the hallway wall with a sickening crunch. The officer didn't even have time to scream. The second officer fired. Pop, pop, pop. The bullets hit the alpha in the chest. I saw puffs of fur and dust fly off him. He didn't fall, he didn't bleed. He just got angry. He lunged at the second officer, swiping his claws across the man's tactical vest. The Kevlar shredded like tissue paper. The officer went down, blood spraying across the hallway wallpaper. I didn't wait to see the rest. I grabbed my phone from the counter and ran. I ran out the door, jumping over the crushed body of the first cop. I sprinted down the hallway to the stairwell. I could hear the sounds of slaughter behind me. I could hear the alpha roaring, a sound that shook the drywall of the entire building. I took the stairs 3 at a time, 4th floor, 3rd floor. Doors were opening. Neighbors were coming out in their pajamas, confused by the gunshots. "Go back inside," I screamed at them. Lock your doors." I burst out into the lobby and onto the street. The cool night air hit my face. I didn't stop. I ran down the sidewalk, past the late-night diners, past the homeless people sleeping on grates. I checked the stream. It was still running. There were 50,000 people watching now. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur. "Did you see that? The police are dead. It's real." I stopped under a streetlight, gasping for air. I looked back at my building. On the roof, silhouetted against the moon, 4 shapes were standing. They were looking down at the street. They were looking at me. They had cleared the building. They had killed the police. And now they owned the block. I turned to the camera. "You saw it," I panted. "You all saw it. The police can't stop them. The walls can't stop them." I heard sirens in the distance. A lot of them. But they weren't coming to save me. They were coming to clean up the mess. I ended the stream. I am a fugitive now. The police think I killed those officers. They think I'm a terrorist. But the 50,000 people who watched the stream know the truth. I stole a truck from a gas station in Mill Creek. It was an old rusted Ford with the keys left in the ignition. The owner was inside buying lottery tickets, hopping to get lucky. I didn't feel bad about taking it. Where I was going, I wouldn't need a ride back. I drove with the headlights off. I stuck to the back roads, the ones that wind through the farmlands and disappear into the foothills. The radio was broken, but I didn't need it to know what was happening. I had seen my face on the TV inside the gas station. "Armed and dangerous," the banner said. "Cop killer. Suspected in the gruesome murder of 2 officers and the disappearance of Laura H." They blamed me for Laura, too. They said I kidnapped her from the psych ward. They didn't find the hole in the hospital window. They didn't find the gray fur stuck in the glass. They just found an empty bed and a crazy ex-boyfriend with a knife. It took me 4 hours to reach the Shadow Creek turnoff. The police tape was still there from 6 months ago, flapping in the wind like a yellow ribbon. It was faded and torn. I drove right through it. The road was worse than I remembered. The heavy rains had washed out the gravel, leaving deep ruts that threatened to snap the truck's axle. The forest pressed in close on both sides. The trees were taller, darker. They leaned over the road like they were trying to grab the truck. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles hurt. I kept waiting for the ambush. I expected them to jump on the hood or slash the tires, but the Michigan woods were silent. It was a respectful silence. They knew I was coming. They were letting me pass. The Alpha didn't want to kill me on the road. He wanted me back at the house. He wanted to finish the game on the board where it started. I parked the truck a mile from the cabin. I didn't want them to hear the engine. I grabbed a tire iron from behind the seat, my only weapon, and started walking. The smell hit me before I saw the cabin. It wasn't just the copper smell of blood anymore. It was the smell of rot, wet, decaying wood and old meat. I stepped into the clearing. The moon was full, casting a spotlight on the ruins. The cabin was a skeleton. The front door was gone. The windows were gaping black holes. The roof had partially collapsed where the Alpha had walked on it that first night. It looked like a skull sitting in the grass, the windows serving as hollow eye sockets. I walked up the porch steps. They creaked under my boots. "I'm here," I yelled. My voice echoed off the trees. "I brought the message," I told them. Silence. I stepped through the doorway into the living room. The furniture was gone. The table we had used as a barricade, the shredded sofa, the rugs, all gone. The floor was bare, stripped down to the pine planks. But in the center of the room, there was a pile. It looked like a dragon's hoard. It was a mound of shiny objects, 3 feet high. I walked closer, shining the flashlight I had stolen from the truck. It was phones, hundreds of them. Cracked screens, glittery cases, heavy-duty construction phones. And keys. Car keys, house keys, keychains with little photos of kids on them. And wallets. I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that Ben and Katie weren't the first, and we weren't the last. This pack had been hunting for years. They had been pulling hikers, campers, and drivers off these roads for decades. The police just called them missing persons or runaways. I kicked the pile, an iPhone slid out. It was dead, but the case had a sticker on it, class of 2024. A kid. They took a kid. Is this it? I screamed at the ceiling. Is this your trophy room? Thump. The sound came from the back bedroom, the room where Katie was taken. I froze. I gripped the tire iron. Thump, thump. It sounded like someone hitting the wall, but it was weak, irregular. I walked down the hallway. The wallpaper was peeling, hanging in strips like dead skin. I reached the bedroom door. It was pushed slightly ajar. I kicked it open and raised the light. The room was empty of furniture, but in the corner, where the closet used to be, something was curled up on a pile of dry leaves. It wasn't a dogman, it was a person. He was naked, emaciated, his skin gray with dirt. His hair was long and matted. He was shivering, facing the wall, hitting his head against the plaster. "Ben," I whispered. The figure stopped moving. He slowly turned his head. I dropped the tire iron. It was Ben, but it wasn't the Ben I knew. His eyes were gone, not missing, just empty. The pupils were blown wide, encompassing the iris. He looked feral. His lips were pulled back over his teeth, and his teeth were filed to points. "Ben," I choked out, "you're alive. We left you at the river, we thought." Ben didn't speak. He opened his mouth and let out a sound. "To-wit." He whistled. My blood ran cold. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a pet. They had kept him. They had broken his mind and turned him into one of them. "Ben, it's me. It's Donald." I took a step forward. Ben scrambled backward, pressing himself into the corner. He hissed. It was a perfect imitation of the alpha's hiss. Then he pointed at the window, the same window Katie had been dragged through. "He comes," Ben rasped. His voice was like sandpaper. He hadn't used human words in months. "Who comes?" I asked. Ben smiled. It was a broken, jagged smile. "The king," Ben whispered. I heard the sound of gravel crunching outside. Heavy footsteps, not one set, dozens. I ran to the window and looked out. The clearing was full. They were standing in a circle around the cabin. There must have been 30 of them. Gray ones, brown ones, black ones. And standing in the front, wearing the tattered remains of a police tactical vest. The one he had ripped off the officer in my apartment was the Alpha. He looked up at me. He raised his hand. He wasn't waving goodbye this time. He was curling his fingers. "Come out." I looked at Ben. He was rocking back and forth, whistling that bird call over and over. I looked at the tire iron. I wasn't getting out of this. I knew that now. The story wasn't about survival. It was about the truth. I pulled out my phone. I had 10% battery left. I hit record. I whispered to the camera. "This is the end. I found Ben. They kept him. They are outside. I'm not going to let them turn me into a pet. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to take as many of them with me as I can." I picked up the tire iron. I looked at Ben one last time. "I'm sorry, Ben," I said. I swung the tire iron. I knocked him out. It was a mercy. I couldn't leave him here to be their toy. Then I walked to the front door. I stood in the frame, looking out at the army of monsters. The Alpha stepped forward. He opened his arms. "Welcome home," he growled. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stepped off the porch and walked into the dark. This is the final file. It was uploaded automatically to the cloud 30 seconds before the phone was destroyed. Sheriff Brody claimed this video was a deepfake created by a disturbed mind. He tried to have it scrubbed from the internet. But once something is online, it never truly disappears. Watch closely, and remember the camera doesn't lie. Video file start 04:12 a.m. Visual, the camera is handheld, shaking violently. It's pointed at the ground, showing Donald's boots crunching on dry leaves. He is breathing hard, short, sharp gasps of adrenaline. Donald, I'm doing this for Ben. I'm doing this for Katie. I'm doing this for everyone you buried. The camera whips up. The flashlight beam cuts through the darkness. It illuminates the clearing in front of the cabin. It is a sea of eyes, dozens of yellow orbs reflecting the light, floating in the blackness. Donald, come on, you want me. Here I am. Donald swings the tire iron. He isn't fighting anything yet. He is screaming at the void. The circle of eyes parts. A massive shape steps forward, the Alpha. He is wearing the shredded remains of the police vest, stained dark. He walks on two legs, arms loose at his sides, confident. He doesn't look like an animal, he looks like a king holding court. Donald, you followed me to the city. You killed those cops. Tell them, tell the camera. The Alpha stops 10 feet away. The flashlight flares on his wet gray teeth. He smiles. The Alpha, no need, tell. The Alpha points a claw at the phone in Donald's hand. The Alpha, they watch. Donald freezes. The creature understands live streaming. He understands the audience. Donald, where is Laura? You took her from the hospital. The Alpha steps aside. Behind him, a smaller figure crawls out on all fours. It is wearing a hospital gown, now tattered and brown with dirt. Her hair is matted over her face. Donald, Laura. The figure looks up. It is Laura, but her eyes are dilated black pits. She isn't bound, she isn't gagged, she is free, but she isn't running. Laura, he says, we are family now, Donald. Her voice is flat, broken, brainwashed. Laura, put down the iron. It's time to play. Donald, no. Laura, snap out of it. Donald takes a step toward her. That is the mistake. The camera jerks violently to the right. A blur of gray fur enters the frame from the blind spot. There is a sickening crunch, the sound of the tire iron hitting bone, or bone hitting the phone. Donald, get off. The phone flies out of Donald's hand. It spins through the air, capturing a blur of trees, moon, and fur. It hits the ground face up. The lens is cracked, splitting the image down the middle. From this low angle, we see Donald fall. He hits the dirt hard. The tire iron lands next to the phone. The Alpha steps into the frame. He puts one massive foot on Donald's chest. We can hear Donald wheezing, the air crushed out of his lungs. The Alpha, you brought the message. Donald gasping, go to hell. The Alpha, no, we bring hell to you. The Alpha leans down, his jaws open. The camera captures the inside of his mouth, rows of serrated teeth, pink gums, black throat. Donald screams. It is a short, wet sound. The camera shakes as blood spatters across the lens. The audio peaks with the sound of tearing fabric and snapping bone. Then, silence. For 10 seconds, the only sound is the wind in the trees and the low, chuffing laughter of the pack. Then a hand picks up the phone. It isn't Donald's hand. It is gray, covered in coarse hair. Black claws click against the screen. The Alpha holds the phone up to his face. One yellow eye fills the entire frame. The pupil contracts as it focuses on the lens. He isn't looking at Donald anymore. He is looking at you. The Alpha, do not look for him. He brings the phone closer. His breath fogs the cracked glass. The Alpha, we have his scent now, we have yours. He taps the screen with a claw. The Alpha, see you soon. Video file ends abruptly. Sheriff Brody found the phone the next morning. It was placed neatly on the hood of his patrol car, parked 3 miles away. It was wiped clean of fingerprints. The official police report states that Donald murdered his friends in a psychotic break and then fled the country. They say there are no monsters in Shadow Creek. They say the video is a high-tech forgery. But last week, Sheriff Brody resigned. He moved to Arizona. He lives in a house with steel shutters and no trees in the yard. I am uploading this from a library computer in a town I won't name. I am the only one left who knows the truth. Donald is gone. Ben and Laura are something else now. The Alpha told you he has your scent. He wasn't lying. If you watched this video, you are part of the story now. Listen to your roof tonight. Listen for the heavy footsteps. Listen for the whistle. And if you hear a voice outside your window that sounds like someone you love, do not open the door. A subscribe button appears in the center of the screen, pulsating like a heartbeat. Subscribe to join the pack.